Dangal greetings everyone. I'm Miss Andreline B. Bustamante speaking, and here is the title of our report and lesson for today: Benefits of specifying clear and appropriate learning targets, along with Miss Antonis Charlene, Batayan Camille, Bernardo Arnelli, and Miss Lacandaso Angelica. Here are the objectives of our lesson for today. At the end of this lesson, students must be able to: number 1, identify the meaning of learning targets; number 2, understand the characteristics of clear and appropriate learning targets; and lastly, number 3, recognize the benefits of elaborating and emphasizing the learning goals. Ms. Antones will further discuss about the learning targets.
What is learning target? It is a statement of students' performance for relatively restricted type of learning outcome that will be achieved in a single lesson which may last a few days. It contains both a description of what students should know, understand, and able to do at the end of instruction. Objectives are for the teachers. I am going to teach this today. Learning targets are for the students. I am going to learn this today. The learning target is the students' and teachers' goal. Clear instruction and criteria will serve as a guide to achieving their goals. Learning targets are most effective when visible to students. Educators can post learning targets bulletin, boards and whiteboards, homework assignments, rubrics, text preparations, and assessments. Repetition helps students stay focused on their target and grow. Learning targets should be in language students understand and relate to what is already being said in the class. Educators should start by identifying long-term learning targets, the skills or content a student will learn. Learning targets can be used to help students with their social and emotional growth as well as academics. Knowing their goals will help them to feel ease because they already know what is expected to learn. Learning targets can be used in two ways. Sometimes educators use them to guide students when they know they will need a roadmap. Other times, teachers can let students grapple and unpack the learning target after the lesson in order to help them metacognitively reflect after the lesson. Learning targets can both be an aim as well as a tool for reflection.
What is a shared learning target? It is sharing the learning objectives with the student for the allotted time. In contrast, during the treatment period, the teacher shared the learning objectives with the student. For the specified time period, during treatment weeks, each class, they began with review of learning targets. The learning targets we would be learning that day and the methods for mastery of them. For example, if the learner target from the previous day was by the end of the day of today's lesson, I'll be able to explain the lesson which I said to be. I would begin a class by asking students to share about what I have tackled and provide an example. Next, it is the danger of flying blind. It is regardless of how important the content, how engaging the activity, how formative the assessment, or how differentiated the instruction. One factor will always remain constant. Me, as their teacher, I will always be the only one providing direction, focusing on getting students to meet the instructional objectives. On the other hand, will prioritize doing what the teacher says over learning. Is constructing a learning target. It is constructing a learning targets are a statement about instruction that are derived from content standards, written in teacher language, and used to guide teaching during a lesson or over a series of lessons. Next is beginning to share. When teachers consistently shared learning objectives in meaningful ways, students became more capable decision makers who knew where they were going and shared responsibility for getting there with the teacher. Students can be coached to take a more strategic approach to their work. because they understand exactly what they are supposed to learn. Next is the power of meaningful sharing. It is the meaningful sharing is that result in students being full learning partners has the potential to be the most impressive if they really understand. When students know where they are going, they are more motivated to hard to get there. Lastly, we have designing a strong performance of understanding. It is when introducing the unit or subunit or lesson, the teacher should share the unpacked learning target for the day and explain how each task in the lesson will lead students toward that target.
Clarity of learning targets. Learning targets are the outcomes or objectives of the lesson that the teacher wants his or her student to attain or acquire at the end of the lesson. This must state clearly what students should know and be able to do at the end of the lesson. Learning targets will be used by teacher as a guide in creating assessment tools. Um, this state that the student of performance for a relatively restricted type of learning outcome that will be achieved in a single lesson or a few days and contain both a description of what students should know, understand, and be able to do at the end of the instruction, and something about the criteria of judging the student, the level of performance demonstrated. Compared with educational goals, standard, and objectives, learning targets are most specific and lead to more specific instructional and assessment activities. Categories of learning targets. The first one is the learning target, the facts and the concept we want students to know. This is a mastery learning of substantive subject content where mastery includes both knowing and understanding it. Knowledge learning targets represent factual knowledge, knowing from memory, procedural knowledge, knowing how to execute series of steps, and conceptual understanding, being able to explain a concept. And number two, reasoning learning targets is the ability of the student to use their knowledge to reason and solve problems. Distinguishes the uses or meanings of a variety of words or word choice. It defines thought process students are to learn, to execute, such as predict, infer, compare, hypothesize, critique, draw conclusions, justify, and evaluate. Number 3, skills learning target. The ability of the student to demonstrate achievement-related skills like conducting experiments, playing basketball, and operating computers. It requires a real-time demonstration or physical performance. Some subjects have no skills targets as a part of their curriculum, and others have quite a few, such as world language, physical education, and fine and performing arts. Number 4, product learning target. The ability of student to create achievement-related products such as written reports, and art products. The content products as written calls for the creation of product and evaluation of learning will be qualities of the product. We often have students create products to demonstrate other types of learning targets, in which case, what should be evaluated in the intended learning, not the qualities of the product. And number 5, lastly, effective learning targets. This refers the attainment of effective traits such as attitudes, values, interests, and self-efficacy. It aims to improve students' attitude about the schools and other related aspects. It concerned with how learners feel while they are learning, as well as with how learning experiences are internalized so that learners' attitudes, opinions, and behavior are guided. Knowledge of students' affective characteristic leads to more target, targeted instruction and successful learning experience for students. Okay, let's proceed to assessment methods. Appropriate assessment methods. In order to provide evidence that educational outcomes are met, different forms of assessment are conducted. Whether it is a traditional paper and pencil test or alternative forms, it will always rely on the objectives of the lesson. These are strategies, techniques, tools, and instruments for collecting information to determine the extent to which learners demonstrated are expected learning outcomes. Um, it will design assessment methods provide valuable information about students' learning. They tell us the students learn how they learned it and where they struggle. We have four categories of appropriate learning targets. Letter E, selected response. B, constructed response format. C, performance test. And D, teacher observations and student self-assessment. This will be discussed by the next reporter. Thank you.
My greetings. I am Camille Batayan, and I am going to discuss the first two categories of appropriate learning targets. One is the selected response. In selected response, students select from a given set of options to answer a question or problem. They will be provided with choices, and all they have to do is to choose the one that best suits what is being asked. Selected response can easily be graded as a multiple choice type of assessment. It is easier to check because questions have only one definite answer for each. Therefore, the teachers can assess and score a great deal of content quickly. Examples of selected response include multiple choice tests, true or false tests, or matching type tests. Second is the constructed response format. This format is more useful in targeting higher levels of cognition. It is also subjective because it demands that students create or produce their own answers in response to a question, problem, or task. With the help of constructed response, students will develop a deeper understanding of the lesson and an ability to formulate more reasonable ideas. Here are the categories of constructed response. First is the brief constructed response item. Items require only short responses from students. Examples are sentence completion, short answer to open-ended questions, labeling diagram, or answering a math problem by showing their solutions. Second are the essay items or assessment. Involve answering by writing series of sentences or paragraphs to satisfy a given question or proposition. It is powerful in the sense that it allows students to express themselves and demonstrate their reasoning. It can also assess students' grasp of higher level cognitive skills, particularly in the areas of application and higher than application. Under the essay items or assessment are the two types of essay tests. First is the restricted essay, which limits both the scope and the response, which looks for specific details. Second is the extended essay. It looks for synthesizing skills. The writer has the freedom on the length of the essay. And the last category of constructive response is the oral questioning, and it is a form of dialogue discussion between individuals based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and to draw out ideas and underlying presumptions.
Thank you, Ms. Camille. And to continue the categories of appropriate learning targets, let's have the performance test, the third part of it. It requires students to perform tasks, create a product, or both. It has two bases, learning by doing and product-based or skills-oriented. In learning by doing, this can be more valid indicators of students' knowledge and skills than other assessment methods, as this is known the direct measure of skills or competence. So in learning by doing, we assess, we evaluate, we judge, and criticize their performance. And a great example of this is the recitation, the group activity of role playing. We criticize and how well and how they would act their character in front of their classmates. So in the product-based or skills-oriented, this means that students must create or produce evidence of their learning or do something and exhibit their skills. They have skills to develop something, a tangible object. A great example of this is the technical vocational students who are developing their skills to create something. As a matter of fact, I'm a technical vocational students, industrial arts, major in welding. We developing our skills to create something. We study the movement of our hands to create a moon shape, crescent shape, to connect two metals. And for the last part of the categories of appropriate learning targets, we have the teacher observation. This is like using your common sense in the middle of teaching learning process. If they can follow your lesson or if you are on the same page with your students, we let them recite, we ask them questions if they clearly understood the lesson, the idea of our lesson, and also for the subject if they can follow up, diba? This should not greatly affect the final grade of the learner. This will be used for defining your teaching methods or realignment of your teaching strategies to capture and sustain students' attention. We create a method on how would the students would follow up on could attain their attention where they can clearly understood the lesson and the idea. This also means reporting or giving of feedback to parents or guardians. I don't know if everyone had it, but I have an experience where my report card has a teacher's opinion on the back of the card, where it can help also the teacher and how would it come up for a teaching method they can use for their students. Here are the references of our lesson for today. Thank you for listening, and if you have really listened, this is a Lucky Clover Cat where you can manifest your goals and your problems. Thank you.